This review will be spoiler-free in regard to important story beats and character development outside of the demo, but we'll talk about game mechanics that weren't in the demo, so if you're somebody whose sense of discovery is shattered by me telling you there's a bounty board, please refrain from watching this video and maybe seek help. I am not a Final Fantasy buff. I've tried several of them, and I always like the stories and characters, but the combat and general gameplay usually turns me off. I'd previously tried the 7 remake, Final Fantasy X, 13, 14, and 15, with the 7 remake being the only one I semi-enjoyed. Let's just say I'm the kind of guy who likes Final Fantasy when it's in Kingdom Hearts. But now we arrive at Final Fantasy 16, and to me, it's in a league of its own, which is a grandiose way of saying I actually like this one. This game took me 38 hours to beat, finish every side quest, and hunt every huntable monster, the latter two aspects walking a fine line between rewarding and slog. This game has 32 hunts, where you look at a bounty on the board and then go find where it is and kill the thing, and what feels like a billion side quests, even though it's actually not that many, but you'll still wish there was less after they got you running all over the map on foot, or a bit later in the game on something else's feet that are barely any faster than your feet. I hate when games have mounts and then program them like tortoises. Listening to Clive say, "Ride like the wind," and proceeding to go 5 miles an hour is just embarrassing. General movement speed is unironically one of the game's biggest issues, because if you're in towns or your spacious hideout, not only can Clive not use his mount, but his top running speed slows to an even lighter jog, and getting from one side of a marketplace to another feels like it takes eons. The game also made sure you can't spam certain abilities to abuse their dashes or teleports by giving them horrendous end lag outside of combat, which just feels spiteful. I said it took 38 hours to do everything, and I guarantee 5 or 6 of them are just from slowly meandering from point A to point B. Fast travel monuments exist, but they are spaced very far apart, so you can have a destination that still takes 2 full minutes to jog to from wherever you teleported. Movement speed across the board should be buffed by no less than 50%, it's really that bad. So that's my biggest issue out of the way. My second biggest issue would be the monotony of most side quests. Some of them are good. They flesh out the story, either they create arcs for your companions and make you care about them more, or they just tell a good self-contained situation. Like, I thought the Chloe quest early in the game was a very effective and affecting quest. The way it played with expectations and really had something to say despite being like a 90-second endeavor all told. I was hoping for more of that, but outside of a few companion quests, that's pretty much all the good stuff. And the rest will either be teleport across the map and fetch this for me, or teleport across the map and fight this for me. Some of them even need you to do that 3 times for one quest. Thankfully, Final Fantasy XVI introduces a highly praised identification system where you can tell which side quests actually give you something meaningful by seeing if there's a plus sign symbol in the bubble instead of an exclamation point. Those ones can have weapons, or recipes, or expanded potion slots, things like that, while the rest will just give you an assortment of money, ability points, and/or XP. Only about 10% of them have that plus sign, but hey. I did every side quest regardless for 2 reasons. 1, I'm working on a boss ranking and had to see if any of them had unique bosses in them, spoiler alert, they don't. And 2, completing side quests of any kind also gives you renown, Fire Emblem style, and when you reach certain amounts of it, you get good free shit, like accessories and extra hordes of ability points. Obviously you can skip side quests, but they have enough incentive behind them that I felt obligated to endure a lot of filler nonsense so I could gain levels and upgrade abilities faster. It's absurd that I'm out here trying to be the savior of the world and whatnot, and some of these losers are like, "Can you please travel halfway across the continent, pick a flower for me, and bring it back, thanks." Like, ask one of the slaves to do it, I'm busy. Decent segue into the story section of the game graph, where we judge story, graphics, mechanics, and fun as separate entities before putting them all together in an overall score that weighs each aspect according to how important it is. Half of Final Fantasy XVI's story is about slavery and working towards helping people who are on the bad end of it, who in this game are anyone who can use magic, called bearers. The non-bearers enslave the bearers for being so bearery, and force them to use their magic to power their ovens and refrigerate their fishies, despite extended use of these magical abilities being life-threatening to the bearers. This is all fine and dandy as a plot device unless you're a reviewer at Game Informer who thinks slavery historically only ever happened to colored folk because racism, and doesn't understand why anyone with light skin should be able to complain about being berated, abused, hunted for sport, and fed to giant behemoths in a video game. If I ever write an article for a game journalist website, please cut off my arms before the infection spreads to my brain. The other half of the story is more about general world saving, with an interesting angle on the topics of certain philosophical and religious debates. I enjoyed it. You'll hear everyone say the story is very Game of Thronesy because it's irrefutable. Some stuff is so on the nose I almost laughed, like ripped straight out of the source material, like the nude scenes when they're in bed but they're not doing anything, they're just talking about ambition or some shit. Game of Thrones isn't the only thing they borrow heavily from, though. Half the icon battles are just a reskinned Dragon Ball Z episode. You've got your ki blast volleys, your spirit bombs, your special beam cannons, your Kamehameha power struggles, it's all there. But don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean it's not cool. Not all the fights are winners, but the ones that are kick absolute ass. I give the story a 90 because I really like the narrative surrounding the main villain when he gets introduced. As for graphics, I always play games on performance mode because the feel and smoothness of gameplay is paramount, but there were times when I wondered if that's what I actually selected because of how infrequently the game would maintain 60 FPS for more than 10 seconds. It was one of those things where you actually notice when the game is running 60 instead of when it isn't. Like all of a sudden the game will have fits of clarity and you're like, oh damn, this feels nice, and then it's gone. There was some very brief chuggy slowdown during some of the icon battle cutscenes, but never more than a second. Visually though, Final Fantasy XVI brings a lot to the table. All the particle effects and choreography on some of the most climactic battles, you can't help but be impressed. It might actually be better to play on graphics mode in this game since performance mode doesn't really hold up its end of the bargain, and then maybe you'll be even more blown away by the visuals, but I never tried it. I'm giving graphics an 85 because you'll also get those lazily animated scenes that are in all Kingdom Hearts / Final Fantasy games where they just flap the lips half-assedly with barely any expressions because they don't give a shit about those moments. Now for mechanics, we'll talk about the battle system, which is one of the highlights of this game for sure. It's active combat, no holding down a button to auto-attack, distinct combos with flexibility that you can do some freestyling with, and an ever-expanding assortment of abilities with cooldowns that can be interspersed into your combos or just thrown out willy-nilly. People make their comparisons to Devil May Cry, and that's accurate for the sword play, but after you get a couple different elements under your belt with their own skills that you can switch between instantly, there's a very distinct Genshin Impact feel to it too. You'll use one or both equipped abilities for your current element, then immediately switch to the next and fire off those ones, then switch again. I think Genshin players will feel more comfortable with this system as it expands later into the game. I've seen people say this game isn't much of an RPG, and that's true. While the combat shines, some of the stuff surrounding it is very watered down and basic. When you level up, you gain pretty much the same stats every time. Your weapon and armor can be swapped out and get reinforced, sort of like Dark Souls, but they only go up to +2 before you just toss it for the next thing that becomes available. And probably 75% of Clive's swords are unique and can't be upgraded at all, which is fucking stupid. I can get a +2 broadsword, but I can't upgrade an actually cool weapon like Ragnarok. You can also equip up to 3 accessories, which range from specific skill cooldown reducers that don't reduce the cooldown by enough to make any difference at all, to minuscule stat boosters, to things that increase your XP or money or ability point gain by a mildly satisfactory amount. I had to be excited about a legendary accessory that increased my overall damage by 5%. Would that it ended up in the trash where mayhap it belonged, my lord. The game is clearly terrified of people becoming OP. By the end I was 2 levels away from max, had the strongest weapon, 2 accessories that improved my offense, and enemies were taking just as long to kill as they were 20 hours ago. But there's no doubt room for optimization, like finding the right icon abilities and the right rotation and timing to get the most out of them in each fight. Enemies have HP, and the bigger or more important ones have a will gauge, which is a stagger bar. Deplete the will gauge, the enemy falls over and puts their controller down for like 20 seconds and becomes less resistant to damage. Stagger damage maximization in this window of time is a must, and using the right moves in the right order can straight up double your damage output. My record near endgame was just shy of 70,000 damage during one opening, but if a couple of my skills were on cooldown or I botched the order of operations, that could fall to 35,000 with the same moveset. You can see how that would make a difference in a boss fight. There were times when I lowered a boss's HP to 0 before the end of the second stagger window, and the game wasn't ready for it, so they just didn't let me kill the dude until he got up and lumbered around for 10 seconds. But finding the right combos for these moves and mixing and matching the large amount of different types there are is very fun and satisfying. I give mechanics an 85 because the combat is hard carrying everything else. Time for fun. Is Final Fantasy XVI fun? Hell yes and hell no. Walking back and forth across entire towns talking to this person, then that person, then the first person again is torture. What I wouldn't give to just run people over with a car from Final Fantasy XV. Fighting, on the other hand, is fun 99% of the time, even if it's just mobs. It's not Kingdom Hearts 2 levels of fun combat, but it's closer than most games get. I happily played this game for 12-hour sessions despite the boring parts. The icon battles were very fun to watch, a little less fun to play. Whenever the fight turned into a cutscene, I was happy to just sit back and watch it like an anime with the occasional baby's first QuickTime event thrown in. This game isn't funny at all, but sometimes it kinda is. Clive does this thing where whenever somebody in a cutscene launches an attack his way that looks a little more dangerous or wacky than a regular attack, he's just like, "Oh, fuck." It happens like 5 times and I enjoyed it every time. And sometimes his voice lines during mob combats are kinda unbalanced. Sometimes he's a guy, and sometimes he's Batman. He'll be like, "It's over," or "You lose," and then sometimes he'll be like, "Die screaming." Keeps you on your toes. I give fun an 85. And now we come to the overall score, where I am officially giving Final Fantasy XVI an 89 out of 100. It's a banger with some issues. It has its moments where you're like, this is the coolest thing ever, and it has moments where you can't believe you have to do all this bullshit. Well, that's gonna do it for this game graph. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can like, share, and subscribe. I got more Final Fantasy XVI videos coming, so watch all my other videos while traveling across the country to deliver a pizza, and I'll see you guys next time.